For this particular video, we're going to work some quadratic formula examples. So we're going to have a couple of quadratic equations to deal with. And we're just going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula, even if there are other methods of solving these. Now, the first one we're going to do is sample problem 1, which is going to give us two real solutions. So we'll discuss this in more detail in a later video, but for right now, this particular type of quadratic equation will give us two real solutions. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and pause the video and work sample problem 1 only, and then come back and watch the solution to sample problem number 1. So go ahead and do that at this time. Okay, if you remember from the previous video, the very first thing that you have to do to work a quadratic formula problem is get the equation in standard form. So we're going to take the polynomial and put it in standard form, which is going to be 3x squared plus 8x minus 35 equals to 0. Now, because we were able to put it in standard form, this gives us the ability to identify the a, b, and c necessary. So in this case, I have a is equal to 3, b is equal to 8, and c is equal to negative 35. Now, what you're probably recognizing at this point is that you could potentially get some big numbers in the quadratic formula, but you have a calculator to help you with that situation. Let's just go ahead and worry about getting the numbers inputted into the quadratic formula correctly. So if you need some help working this problem, keep the quadratic formula in front of you and you can plug in appropriately. So let's take a look. I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and of course that square root extends across everything, and all of that is over 2 times a. Now, you have a couple ways to go here. This is just an order of operations problem at this point, so we need to condense this problem down to its simplest form, whether it has a radical in it or not. And you can use your calculator in the most efficient way that you feel comfortable. If you want to break it down into various steps, you can. If you want to punch it all into your calculator in one step, you can. Just be sure that you use parentheses in an appropriate way. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you a handful of steps. It might make it a little easier. So I'm going to take care of everything under the radical first. So it's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 84, and then 2 times 3 is 6. And so that's going to be a little bit helpful. Now, the first thing that you should always do before you start trying to simplify the radical, especially with a large number like 484, is just check it to see if it's a perfect square or not. And in this case, it is. So we're going to end up with x equals negative 8 plus or minus 22 over 6. Excuse me. And since we need two solutions and we can combine these together, we need to break the plus or minus up. So we're going to have x equals negative 8 plus 22 over 6, which equals to 14 over 6, which equals to 7/3. So that's one of our two solutions. Or x is going to equal to negative 8 minus 22 over 6, which is going to give us a negative 30 over 6, which is going to reduce to negative 5. And of course, that is our second solution. So you can see here that both of the solutions were real numbers. Now we'll discuss later, as I said in another video, how you can recognize what your solutions are going to look like. So let's move on to sample problem number 2 and see how that plays out. So for sample problem number 2, you can see that it says that we're going to have one real solution. Now, if you've been paying attention in class and to previous videos, anytime we have something with one real solution, you should recognize that that is going to be a perfect square trinomial. Now, just by looking at this equation, it doesn't look anything like a perfect square trinomial, but remember, the very first thing that you need to do is to rearrange this until you get into the standard form, and then move forward with the problem from there. So go ahead and pause the video at this point and work it through, either using the quadratic formula or some other method that you may recognize. Okay, I'm actually going to work this problem in two different ways. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract the 12x from both sides, add the 5 to both sides, which gives me 0 on the left-hand side equals to 2x squared minus 12x plus 18. Now, technically, that is standard form, even though the 0 is on the left side. You could rewrite that with 0 on the right side if you were more comfortable. Now, I could go one route here, which is probably the more desirable route, which is just to divide the common 2 out from everything. And so when I do this, now I'm going to go ahead and rearrange this. X squared minus 6x plus 9 equals to 0. We can clearly see that this is a perfect square trinomial. And so if we break these up, I get x is equal to 3, and there's really only one solution in this case because they're both going to end up equaling to 3. Now, if I want to get some practice using the quadratic formula, I can take the new standard form here and use my a, b, and c off of that just to make my numbers simpler. There's nothing that says that we have to use the 2, the negative 12, and the 18. So in this case, I can make my a 1, my b equals negative 6, and my c equals 9 as a result of my new standard form. And so if I'm going to use the quadratic formula, I'm going to end up with a negative b, which in this case was negative 6, plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times a times c, and we're going to be all over 2 times a. Now notice how important it is that I use parentheses for my negative numbers, especially when I was squaring it. So here we're going to be left with 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 36, and I'm drawing that out for a specific reason so that you can see this. 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2. And of course the square root of 0 is always 0, so we're going to be left with x equals 6 over 2, which means x is equal to 3. So you can see here when we have a perfect square trinomial that we end up with this special situation right here, and that is definitely going to come into play in a later video. So that is a second example. First one had 2 real solutions. The second one had 1 real solution. So if we move to the third example problem number 3, we're going to our last possibility, which in this case is 2 imaginary solutions. So go ahead and pause the video at this point. Use quadratic formula again to help us solve this, and then you should recognize the 2 imaginary solutions when you see it. Okay, first step here is to write the equation in standard form. So we're going to have negative x squared plus 2x minus 2 equals to 0. Now, this is probably one of the bigger mistakes that a lot of students make. If you recognize the standard form says ax squared, that a should be in a positive mode. So negative x squared does not technically give us this in standard form. So what I'm going to need to do here technically is to divide everything by a negative 1 to get it in the standard form, which is going to be x squared minus 2x plus 2 equals to 0. So I now have the quadratic in the appropriate standard form, and I can come up with my a, b, and c values. So a is going to equal to 1. B is going to equal to negative 2, and C is going to equal to a positive 2. So those are the values I'm going to want to use for my quadratic formula. So if I plug this in, negative B, again I'm going to use parentheses appropriately, square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, square root of that whole thing, all over 2 times A. So if I just go through my order of operations here, I'm going to end up with 2 2 plus or minus square root of negative 4 over 2. And of course, that's going to give me an imaginary number, which is going to be 2 plus or minus 2i over 2. And since they have a common denominator, both sides can actually reduce, and that's going to be 1 plus or minus I, which is going to give me my two imaginary solutions. So that is 3 examples of using the quadratic formula when you have different types of solutions. In the next video, we're going to talk more specifically about those types of solutions and how you can identify them before you actually start to do the work.